Oh, there we
And
go.
and we're live now. Hello,
There it
guys.
is.
This is Epicurus A. Greek coming in with EdJacobson77, who was nice enough to engage me in previous videos, whose channel I'm going to put in the description box once this is over, and who would encourage all of you to subscribe to. Swell guy. And he's with me now, and we're basically going to shoot the breeze, have a discussion on the whole internet atheist theist kind of back and forth. I'm going to ask some
Hmm.
personal questions, and also just to remind everyone once again, on the 27th I will be debating G-Man on which is more biblical Catholicism or evangelical Christianity, which should be very fun for both of us. I hope you all look
Theist.
forward to it. It's on Shanna Rocky's channel. I'll also put her channel in the description in case anybody's interested. Without further ado, this is Ed Jacobson. I'm just to kick off the interview. What would you like to tell us about yourself, if anything?
Oh, what do I like to say about myself? 36-year-old atheist. Um, haven't really believed maybe since I was about 14, but very interested in the conversation. And just, I think that, look, we have to live with each other in this world, if there's a world after this or not. And we're here now, we have to live with each other, and it's important to have these kinds of dialogues. And even if we can't change each other's minds on anything, at least we can sort of understand each other's positions better. And I think that is a valuable exercise. So,
And yeah, and I would pretty much agree with that. So onto the um, onto the more specific questions. Is there any kind of video or point where you were like, screw it, I'm just going to make a video and engage in this dialogue?
probably after watching the New Covenant group,
Hmm.
just because the tone is so right. I mean, here you have theists and atheists disagreeing with each other, but doing it in such a polite and simple manner, and so much more gets done on that show than all of the flame wars that take place, in the comments section of other videos. So I think it was probably that. It was also the fact that a lot of times I hear atheists, they don't really respond very well to a lot of questions, and I get frustrated sometimes when I hear someone respond in a way that I think I can do better than, and I have to get involved. On top of that, I don't really have too many people in my personal life who like to talk about this stuff. Most of my family is theist. Most of my friends are atheists, but none of them want to talk about this stuff. I bore them all to death when I start talking. Well, even the atheists. I'm like, hey, listen to this argument this theist just made. What do you think? No, I don't care about that. And it's the same thing with my folks. They're theists, and I say, well, Ma, what do you think of this argument? She just cuts me off at the pass. She says, look, Ed, I'm not going there with you because I know you'll win. So just don't even don't. I know you know more about this stuff than me, so I'm just not going there. So when you have this topic you're so interested in, and no one in your personal life really seems interested in talking about it with you, you go on YouTube and you make videos and you find people who are like-minded. So it's
Yeah.
really just a way of it's an outlet for me. It's a way of getting these thoughts out that I just can't suppress anymore.
Man, I completely agree with you on that one. I also lack people in my personal life who will go out and discuss this with me. Uh, you can't really talk about this at a bar. You can't talk about this at the dinner table. So random strangers on the internet it is. And
I
I'm,
guess it's going to have to be that way. You know what?
yeah, I'm grateful for all you guys, anyone who participates in this. Thank you for also giving me an outlet too. Um, yeah. With regards to what you usually take on, do you find general theistic claims to be what your main drive is, or do you find it to be more specific claims like young Earth creationism, so to say?
I think it's well, young Earth creationism at this point. I don't think any sophisticated theist really believes in that anymore, right? I mean, that's really kind of like the Ray Comforts of this world. So I would say it's more the general theistic claims, cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, that sort of thing. Because I mean, disproving young Earth creationism, first of all, I mean, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. And second of all, not everyone who believes is a young Earth creationist. There are plenty of people like yourself who have much more sophisticated reasons. So I kind of leave the young Earth creationism alone. There are people who are better equipped to discuss the scientific evidence why that's wrong. Better equipped than I am for sure.
Yeah, and that also includes theists as well as atheists. I think there's a lot of us who really just want good science to be taught in our schools, and leave the more general stuff to us in our homes. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want anybody discussing any religious things in schools because if I have kids, that's my job.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna
absolutely.
I wouldn't want a young Earth creationist account being taught alongside evolutionary theory. That's because first of all, that's not science, and second of all, that's not the theology I would want and put on my kids. If that honestly, if
Right.
young Earth creationism was the only viable way to be a Christian, I would probably leave tomorrow.
Right, exactly, exactly. And there's any number of Christian critics of young Earth creationism. So I don't really see it as a pressing issue. I think it's something that will eventually die off on its own. So yeah,
Although they have taken to the whole presuppositionalist argument because they know they can't really debate on evidence.
yeah, presuppositionalism is interesting, isn't it?
Yep, it's like smashing your head against a brick wall.
Well, the thing that gets me about it is, you've taken, okay, so they've identified this age-old philosophical question of how do we know what we think we know? I mean, this is a huge problem,
Mhm.
and they point out that it's a problem, and it is, but then they don't really offer a solution that you can grab a hold of. It's like, well, because there's a person who knows everything who has told me certain things with certainty. And it's like, well, how does that work? They can't tell us anything about that. I
Yeah,
mean, I mean, you haven't really solved the problem, have you? I mean, to respond to that by saying, well, I don't do Bible study with atheists. Well, come on now. I mean, I could answer, okay, fine. Then in that case, I know for a fact God does not exist. Well, how do you know that? Well, listen, I don't discuss secular epistemology with non-atheists. I mean, where have we gotten? I mean, you identify what you think is a problem with my worldview, and you say that I need to make the worldview closer to yours, or incorporate aspects of your worldview because your worldview solves this problem. Well, I think I have a right to ask how does it solve that problem before I come over. I mean, I wouldn't, buy a car I couldn't test drive first. First, show me how it solves that problem, and then we'll talk. No, no, no. You have to buy the car first. If that analogy makes any sense.
no, no, that's actually a completely great analogy. Um, Usually in the past, people have this actually was a belief that was floated around in Christian history. It was called divine illumination, and it was
Hmm.
held by Augustine of Hippo. He made it very well known, and then Boethius and Saint Anselm and a lot of others took this to be the way in which everybody knows. God illuminates knowledge to all creatures in order for them to find Him in some way, shape, or form, and some He even blesses with grace.
Hmm.
What's very interesting is it's based on, funny enough, you should actually bring this up. It's based on a Neoplatonic view of knowledge. Basically, the Neoplatonists also thought that the world of the forms also illuminated information to us because that's where we existed previously as divine beings in a sense. Then our soul became part of human body, and then it just floats back up again, and that's how we know
Hmm.
things.
Right. We're just
So
learning
Augustine
things or
was like,
just remembering things, right? That's what he said.
right, exactly. Yeah, so for Augustine, basically because souls come from God or souls are crafted by God, we're in a sense intuiting God in every way, shape, or form. So in a sense, knowledge is basically the knowledge of the actual world is basically a divine thing, something that's divine, and every form of discovery is us basically discovering more about God and the world itself. So
Hmm.
that's actually not a bad view, particularly. You still have to solve some problems, like how do you know this God is reasonable, or even giving us a good means of doing it in the first place? How do you know what we're intuiting is bad? And then as soon as you start using your reasoning to explain it, you could easily undercut that and say, well, how do you know that the reasoning you're doing isn't from a God who is just substantiating faulty reasoning in you? And of
Right.
course, you could kind of push this doubt because if you use your reasoning, it's kind of it's to borrow their term viciously circular.
Well, they would call it virtuously circular. Oh no, sorry, yeah, that would be viciously circular. They invented a new term, virtuously circular, which doesn't exist except in their lexicon. But
Yeah, unfortunately, I find the better explanation is Thomas Aquinas's it's known as abstraction or abstractive.
Mhm.
Basically the mind is geared towards the end of abstracting things from the world around it. So you have a rock, you can understand rockness, shapes,
Sure.
for example. These are known as universals, and our mind is geared towards abstracting them. And
Yeah.
yeah, so basically, knowledge.
That's not a bad definition of a mind when you think about it.
Oh no, not at all. So not at all. And there were other forms that came along the way. Some some like John Locke and those in the empiricist tradition just said what we see is just a representation of the outside world. It's not the actual outside world itself.
Right,
So
right.
so again, you kind of keep evolving. Now there are people who just don't even think that the mind. Well, I shouldn't say they don't think the mind exists. They do, but they think it's mostly an illusion. This is, if anyone's interested in this, it's called eliminative materialism.
Yeah, eliminative materialism. And I actually think that they would say the mind doesn't exist.
Yeah,
Which I don't know how. Yeah, listen, I'm not going to even go there.
no worries, no worries. I don't think we should. Let's just keep it to a meta discussion. But
I
uh,
think the mind exists.
I, I think we can all agree on
I
that.
am not. I am not an eliminative materialist.
I think both of us can agree on that much.
Yeah.
Okay, but all right, but just to return the conversation, yeah, the presuppositionalist method is bad in that sense, but I do think there is a way of appropriating it. Basically, I kind of view it as an encouragement to engage in dialogue instead of
Hmm.
one person constantly coming up with assaults. This way, it forces both the people with their own worldviews to, in a sense, compare and contrast one another and see the shortcomings and flaws and the strengths in their own worldview and maybe learn from that. So you basically learn by engaging in one another, as
Sure.
opposed as opposed to just demeaning the other guy, because everyone comes in with presuppositions, and I think it's good to
Yes.
explore that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. All of us have beliefs that we can't prove, that we're just assuming before we even, before we even start putting together a worldview. We have certain presuppositions. There's no question about that.
Mm.
And we're
Yeah.
all, and on some level, we're all assuming the general reliability of our cognitive faculties. We're not assuming that they're infallible, because we know we sometimes make mistakes, but we generally have to assume the general reliability of our cognitive faculties, or else we can't move forward in any way. Can't get past square one.
Mm, exactly. Although I think that the young Earth creationists retorting to the presuppositionalist method are basically showing signs that their worldview is cracking down,
Yeah,
ironically enough.
yeah. I mean, it's almost like someone something. It's almost like they couldn't win with logic, so someone said, "Logic? Did you just say logic? Well, wait a minute. You can't use logic in the first place because logic comes from God."
Uh, exactly. Um, they don't have a good ontology for what logic is, and plus they also mistake the epistemological notion of how do you know for for the on for the ontological concept, which is
Mm.
basically in what the mechanics of knowing, or what is knowing like in a sense.
Right,
So
right, right.
so they always keep kind of going back and forth on that one. That's why I usually don't engage in the presuppositionalist method.
I hope to God I never meet a presuppositionalist.
I have actually. It's kind of interesting because as a theist, they can't really do the same song and dance with me.
that
Instead,
would be that would be an interesting conversation to watch.
I have actually had a few discussions with a guy known as Arcane Truth or Three the Ghost. Have you heard of him?
No, haven't.
Good for you. But basically, as soon as I announced he was a Christian, he was like, "Okay, but the Bible says," and I'm like, "No, you're just interpreting it wrong." Also, by your interpretation, Paul would be sinning by opening up scriptures and talking to people who denied the existence of God.
Hmm.
So
That's a good point.
also when Paul taught things to the Stoics and the Epicureans, he wasn't throwing Bible verses at them. He was just saying, "Look, this is the beauty of the Christian worldview," and he was actually using examples that would be very comparable to their own worldview. Uh,
Hmm.
so in that kind of sense, I don't see any biblical root for presuppositionalist apologetics. And plus, Paul kind of called God the God of nature. So man is without excuse. That basically means when you look to the natural world, you, with the unaided reason, you can come to the discovery or knowledge of God, or not the Hebrew God specifically, but a notion that there is a God behind the general notion. That's like more of a classical theistic notion of God. Not,
Right.
you know,
Shades of the teleological argument.
basically that's true. Although the teleological argument has evolved in a weird way. Um,
Yeah, it has. I mean, we've moved it out of the sphere of biology and into the realm of physics, really, when you think about it.
Not only that, but we actually took it out of the realm of metaphysics beforehand. So
Hmm.
So when Thomas Aquinas was talking about metaphysics, I mean, about his fifth way, which everyone interprets as being this kind of William Paley watchmaker analogy, it's
Hmm.
completely untrue. He was referring to everything has a purpose, like everything has purposeness or something that it goes towards, like
Right.
teleology. So, but at the end, there's something that the whole universe is going to, and that thing we call God. Because if God tends towards something himself, then he's part of that thing called the universe. Now, the proper response today would be, okay, I just don't accept that final causality or that teleological inference. So William
Right.
Paley came in and said, look, think of it more like not something that's internally purposeful, but purposeful because of external conditions, like a
Right.
watch. We basically have these mechanics together, and we derive a purpose. Everything is kind of working like a clock, so it's more of an external thing, and that was applied to biology, and as you so said, taken into the realm of physics, where I don't think it should be myself.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could say about the fine-tuning argument, but I mean, No More has that great response when you talk about things which have external purpose. But if you have a God who designed the thing that has the external purpose, and also designed the environment that it's supposed to be purposeful to, that doesn't really work. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw his video on design arguments,
I actually have. It's
but
where he took on the. I have. It's where he took on that creationist. I'm not sure of his name. Live Life something. If I think
no,
I'm.
I'm thinking of he has that series called The Assumptions of Design Proponents. I think it's a six-part series. I don't know if you watched that one.
No, I haven't, but it looks like it sounds interesting. I heard him respond to a young Earth creationist who was asking, "Was your brain intelligently designed?"
Yeah, okay, yes. That was Once Forgiven, Now Free.
Once
He did a
forgiven, never
response.
free.
Yes, yeah. So basically, he trots the same sort of counter argument out against Once Forgiven, Now Free,
Mhm.
where yeah, and that touches on his stance on design. But if you liked that, if you thought that that was an interesting response, you definitely watch his six-part series. I think it's six parts
Mhm.
called The Assumptions of Design Proponents, where he talks about that every example we have of design involves an object that has been fitted to the environment. The environment was a given, and the designer had to adapt the object to fit in the environment. And that's actually what you do when you design something in the first place, in the teleological sense, right? Or in the external purpose sense. But when you have a God who created the object and the environment, what was being fit to what? I mean, when you think about it, anything either it could have gone either way. So it bears no analogy to any form of design we're otherwise familiar with.
Yeah. I would actually encourage people to think of it more as a teleonomic kind of argument. The
Yes.
difference between teleonomic and teleological is
Right.
teleological means that something is innately purposeful, like purposeness is just part of its nature,
Right.
and it's geared or has a directness towards something else. However,
Right.
when it comes to teleonomics, it's like everything is basically material and efficient cause. There's something, and it's appropriated or given efficient causality to be for something else. So
Hmm.
everything is mechanistic. In fact, the problem I have with William Paley's watchmaker argument and the whole teleological proponents nowadays, like the fine tuners, is the fact that they're basically embracing a form of metaphysics that the church kind of rejected and looked badly towards, but with the Enlightenment, like with guys like Descartes. In fact, they were called, and it's funny enough, mechanical atheists because they just thought that God was a watchmaker who winded up the clock and just let it go. So,
Right.
so that kind of thing, and that's essentially what the intelligent design proponents are doing. They're basically taking in that teleonomic kind of way of thinking and saying, well, God's the teleonomic maker. He pushes it externally. It's not an intrinsic thing. Um, so I so I think that's basically the main difference.
And also, when you place the design in the realm of physics in the form of a fine-tuning argument, in a sense, you're placing limitations on God. I mean, when you say things like, well, if the laws of physics hadn't been this way, life couldn't have existed. Well, why couldn't God make life under some other of physics? Right? I mean, don't can't he make life any which way he wants? I mean, why can carbon only exist under a particular set of physics? Maybe he's God. He made the whole thing out of nothing. He determines, what physical states correspond to what laws of physics in the first place. Surely he could have made life any which way he wanted.
No, I completely agree with you on that account. And this is actually what's wrong with how people are perceiving creation ex nihilo now when they think of it just in terms of material and efficient causality. It kind of undercuts the whole creation ex nihilo concept, because basically what you're thinking of is kind of like an architect who's taking something and building something else. However, God doesn't
Correct.
need, and however, God doesn't is not supposed to technically need anything. If he's an architect, what is he kind of building on? There is no material. He's creating material. So basically, the notion of final causality purports that God, in a sense, keeps the world existent with his own existence. So because his existence in a way gives the universe purposeness in some way, shape, or form, the universe's existence in a sense is contingent upon him existing too. And this is what creation ex nihilo teaches, that God's efficient cause and what's known as final cause proceed to be one and the same, because he's somebody who keeps something in existence by his own existence. So the reason why we say he created the world from nothing is better stated, he created the world without anything. That means he didn't have anything to create the world with. He didn't take a nothing and start making it like it was a tool.
Right.
Mm.
Right. Well, it's very interesting.
Yeah. This is why I would encourage all Christians to stop looking at, I shouldn't say this, but to look at popular apologetics, because a lot of it doesn't take into account the philosophical background that's going into these arguments. I'd suggest that they take courses in medieval metaphysics. That's probably your best bet, and neo-scholasticism. You don't even need to be a Catholic to do it. There are even Calvinists who are starting to do likewise, and good for them.
Are any of these courses available online?
Where
would I access these courses?
Well, I think the best. Well, basically, what I've bought so far is with my own money. So my background in scholastic metaphysics comes from a beginner's guide to Thomas Aquinas, which you have to purchase. But for you, I'll give you my copy for free since it's online. Just email and PDF.
No, don't worry about that. I'll get it myself. So a beginner's guide, because I don't want to impose. So a beginner's guide to Thomas Aquinas.
Yeah, it's by a Catholic philosopher known as Edward Fazer. Also, there's a terrific work called Aquinas by Eleanor Stump, in which I actually used to answer.
Yeah, I've heard of her.
All of that is some good stuff. Plus, if you look up Thomism online, there's more complex work. It's not really a beginner's guide, but you could basically get a good idea of what Thomists go on about.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely check it out. Yeah, I mean, Aquinas is not really a guy I've thoroughly researched. I mean, I've obviously more familiar with some of the more popular apologetic arguments.
Yeah, it's kind of that pushed me to look at more of the sources, because it's nice on the face of it, because I find a lot of popular apologetics appeals to pop notions of things like for example, libertarian free will. It also appeals to a theory of time, or popular conceptions of time. But when you're actually asked to defend these notions, you're like, proper basicality?
But as we know, much of philosophy is counterintuitive. And a lot of philosophers don't really buy into libertarian free will. I think a lot of the popular apologetics, when William Lane Craig says things like the universe can't pop into existence from nothing, yeah, that sounds very plausible, and he's great at taking, his opponent's views and framing them in language which sounds preposterous and silly. Well, if there's no God, then everything just popped into existence out of nothing for no reason. But, I mean, is that really a fair way? I mean, if you're talking about an immaterial God who creates ex nihilo, who exists nowhere and never, I could play the same sort of game that he's playing and say, well, then the universe was made out of nothing by a person who's made out of nothing, who exists nowhere and never. That wouldn't be a very fair way of framing what he's saying. I mean, it would be totally unfair when you think about it, because what he's saying is a lot more sophisticated than that. But it would sort of be tit for tat. I think, from the way that he's taking an atheist position and framing it in the most absurd-sounding language to appeal to his audience. So yeah, it would be nice to move away from that kind of apologetic, and read people who are trying to actually solve real problems in philosophy, rather than just make atheists look like idiots.
I completely agree with you on that one. I've actually been in a hangout where a young Earth creationist who will be nameless for the meantime was actually calling other people accidentalists. How could all of this have come from an accident? My response was, atheists don't believe it was an accident. They just believe that the universe is just a brute fact, and
Yeah.
conditions
I,
just like the outcomes.
I saw that. That was the response to not Fred Durst. Or no, it wasn't the response to not Fred Durst. It was somebody else, but I actually saw that.
No, it was actually on a live hangout. It wasn't. I know the guy you're talking about, and I know like 10 atheists who've done response videos to that stupid video, like that stupid video he took on his cell phone. Believe me, I was pretty embarrassed by that much. Like,
Yeah,
no, you obviously don't understand your opponent's arguments. Shut up,
yeah.
you moron.
So that's it. Either it's the work of a god or it's an accident, and those are the only two things, my only two options. Yeah, it's yeah. I don't know. I think on some level, a person who argues in that way really only sees personal cause or the actions of a personal agent as the only type of cause that could ever possibly exist. I mean, if you try to explain things to him, well, no, look, I mean, okay, gravity doesn't act with intent, right? But gravity is not an accident, even though it doesn't have intentions. You know, you can't really get a person like that to understand that there might be some other kind of cause other than one that has purposeful intent. Do you know what I mean?
I completely understand what you mean. And the only real sign of randomness, as it's properly understood, that's considered in science, is in quantum mechanics. That's probably the only place you could actually find real randomness, with virtual particles just popping in and out without any formal pattern whatsoever.
Right. Otherwise, if we can predict it, if we can describe it in a law-like manner, then it's the opposite of random. You know, but it doesn't have intent. So trying to get people just to understand that concept, it's not random, but it also doesn't have intent either. Just trying to get people to understand that basic concept, I think, would go a long way to them understanding that atheists don't necessarily believe that everything is a random accident.
Yeah, basically the best way I have heard is, look, eventually you're going to have to go back to a brute fact. It's going to be either God or the universe.
Yes.
Basically, the theist is trying to say, look, it's not the universe, it has to be God, and the atheist says, no, it's the universe, and your thing is just an unneeded hypothesis.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah.
what the argument is.
Yeah, at some point you end up positing. I completely agree. At some point, we have to terminate this infinite regression at some point, and whatever that is, you posit is just there as a brute fact and exists by itself. Or maybe it's the multiverse. Apparently now we live in a multiverse. Who knew? Maybe it's not it's not the universe anymore. Now it's the multiverse or the quantum foam or whatever the damn thing is.
At this point in time, I'm actually taking physics very lightly until I actually see a consensus on cosmology and quantum mechanics. I'm just seeing all these models as instruments. They're very helpful in the meantime, but until we get something that's far more concrete, this is what we have to work with. I don't take that view with biology, for example, because we're pretty sure where origins are. We're pretty sure that there's common descent.
Right. I tend to agree. I mean, we're so early in our investigation of this subject, and the subject is so incredibly difficult. And whatever it is that's this necessary, uncaused something that makes everything else possible, we're awfully far removed from it, and so early in our studies of it, that I would tend to agree with you. I would take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, very much so. And the thing I'd actually like to say is, if there are people who do support the Kalam, I'm not saying just don't reference science. It's a nice reference. Like, say, it's kind of alluding to that, but it's not like it doesn't firmly assert that there is most definitely a beginning without anything prior. Usually, Kalam proponents, if they're smart, will just stick to the metaphysical impossibility of infinities, which is where I've heard the better argument lays. Personally, I don't tend to disagree. I think probably there you have a shot of working with it. but I do not think you can just say cosmology says so, therefore I'm right.
Yeah. Yeah, the Kalam is a philosophical argument, not a scientific one. It's informed by scientific facts, but it's not drawing a scientific conclusion. It's saying here are the facts, and if we think about them in a logical way, if we do some metaphysics, if we apply metaphysics to what we know from physics, we can deduce the existence of this sort of being that has these sort of properties. I mean, I think that's what it's aimed at.
Yeah, specifically, all cosmological arguments try to do is say the universe has property X. Property X requires some necessary Y. That necessary Y is God, therefore God. So the Kalam uses beginningness. I think Avicenna's argument from contingency uses necessity and contingency. Leibniz.
I actually like that one better.
Oh wow, thank you. Leibniz's argument uses what's the word I'm looking for? Uses the principle of sufficient reason, so it gives the universe an epistemological quality to it. So basically, all these metaphysical arguments, all these cosmological arguments are trying to do is say there's a metaphysical property that exists within the universe that requires some agent God working outside of it. That's basically the surmise of a cosmological argument. It's very much not everything that exists needs a cause. God, therefore God caused it. It doesn't work like that.
Right. I mean, you have to. If everything that exists needs a cause, then God needs a cause. You need to find a way of distinguishing God from everything else. So that's what the Kalam tries to do. It says no, not everything needs a cause. Everything that begins to exist needs a cause. I mean, no one uses the original cosmological argument anymore because they realize that it's special pleading to just say, yeah, God doesn't need a cause. No, you need to establish why. Sorry?
That actually was never the original cosmological argument, at least as far as I could tell. If I actually can look into history and go back to, I think the first cosmological argument ever was Aristotle's unmoved mover argument, and he never even said that anything that has a cause needs a cause for its existence. All he said was everything which moves needs a cause for its movement. And he reasoned back to an unmoved mover who is himself unmoved and thus gets out of the loophole.
I think probably my formulation of the original cosmological would be more a description of kind of like the pop psyche, what's in the general public's idea regarding the cosmological arguments. Well, everything had to come from something, that sort of thing. Probably it may never be. I mean, I'm sure we could dig up some philosopher that used it, but you're probably right.
I think it might have come from a pop understanding, to be sure, but I think if one looks at the philosophers who actually had schools and left an influence, I think out of the popular mass, no one would have used that argument. I find it hard to believe that any person of any sophisticated or academic person of any age would be foolish enough to go to use that kind of formulation, especially Aristotle, the guy who founded logic.
Well, I mentioned that one philosophy course I took in law school. My professor in that course used that argument. He said to me, if there's no God, then who made the world, Mr. Jacobson? And I was like,
oh, really?
Look, yeah, really. And I said, look, okay, you understand
the definitely a philosophy of law class.
Yeah, I was like, look, all right, you understand the concept of a loaded question. You understand that I don't think there was a who, right? I mean, first you have to establish that the world, as you call it, was created, and then establish that it was created by a who rather than a what or an it. Then your question will make sense to an atheist. Why do you think those two things? Why do you think it was created, and why do you think it was created by a who? How do you know these things? And he said to me, I know because, well, who made the stars? And I was like, oh, God.
One step back. He was clearly a philosophy of law professor, just to be a bit cocky about that.
Yeah. But he was. He was a philosophy of law professor.
Well, I'm pretty sure he knew what to teach you when it came to what's better, constitutionalism or, the forms of constitutionalism or legal interpretations, that kind of thing.
This was actually a completely different kind of class. I mean, it was just the origins of our laws. And so, I mean, we read Plato, we read the Republic, we read the Bible. We even read Karl Marx at one point.
That's always interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a totally different type of class. But I was just sitting there thinking to myself, oh God, I'm dealing with Ray Comfort here.
Oh man, I can only imagine Ray Comfort teaching a class on anything, which would be funny. This here is a banana.
Well, he's kind of moved away from that since he did accept that the bananas we have are not wild bananas, that they are actually the way they are because of human cultivation.
No, yeah, I would assume so. I think he made that was one of the few wise decisions Ray Comfort has ever made. Uh,
Poor Ray.
uh, yeah,
No, but what I wanted to say about the argument for contingency, I
mm,
think I may have said this before. I think there's a lot of plausibility to the idea that if there is a necessary non-contingent something, that it's ultimately simple. I've always see what I really liked about the whole conversation is that up until now, I had always thought of God necessarily as something that had to be very complex.
mhm.
And I always said to myself, look, the history of the universe, so far as we can tell so far, appears to be a history of things coming from simpler things, not just on Earth, but cosmically as well. The further back we go, things seem to be getting simpler and simpler. Why would you have the first thing ever be the most complex thing possible? But what I liked about your whole discussion of divine simplicity is that it turns that on its head. It says, no, 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 no. The first thing ever was the simplest thing possible, and everything else is contingent upon it. I think there's a lot of plausibility to that. You
Mm,
know, like
yeah.
I find. I mean, I'm not as convinced of it as you are, but I think it's very plausible. Like as we discussed, the thing that bothers me is when it becomes a personal agent. And I know we're going to get into. I mean, I don't know if we're going to get into that in this Hangouts. I'll probably do a response video to your blog post because you had an explanation for why it could be seen as a personal agent. But this is a friendly hangout. We're not gonna argue about that shit now.
I will say this though, it has its origins in Neoplatonic philosophy too.
Okay.
So, so basically, if one looks at Christian history, it's a very brilliant syncretization of
Yeah.
Greek Hellenistic philosophical concepts working in tandem with the Judeo-Christian theology and rituals, which is very interesting because Aristotle or Plato, they never tried to merge. Well, actually, I shouldn't say Plato. I think Plato did have a role where gods played in his Republic, but Aristotle
Mm.
himself never tried to merge his prime mover with any of the gods present within his culture or background. He
Yeah.
just said it was the prime mover. It was something that was just far out there, and it only conceives of the most
Mm.
perfect thing, which is
Yeah.
itself, because it's
Yeah.
that.
It sits in endless contemplation of its own thoughts,
Yeah.
which you would think, when you think about it, sounds like the sort of thing Aristotle probably would have wanted to do if he had his druthers.
I always, yeah, it's very interesting about that. We do tend to, there is always that personal notion where we try to infer our concept of God into God Himself, and that's why I kind of like apophatic theology, which is basically a description of describing God what He is not, because we do tend to make Him in our image, in a
Mhm.
sense. And that also with regards to the whole divine simplicity thing, uh, that's where it comes from. And it was really, I think, in terms of history, very smart of the Christians to take and adopt that and apply it to their religion and their theology. I think it was one of the best moves made by the church fathers.
Hmm. Well, obviously, I'll have my own stuff to say about divine simplicity, but I want this to be a friendly hangout, not
Oh, no, no sweat. Uh, so we've already discussed the teleological argument. We've already bashed presuppositionalists. We've let's see, we've discussed cosmological arguments. And
right.
I think more or less we're on the same page about the stuff we disagree with.
Hmm.
Let's see if I can think of kind of another kind of argument to discuss, or at least something to bring forward to. Um, let's see. Oh, how about this? With regards to, I know we already discussed young Earth creationism, but with regards to possibly evolution itself, just kind of the process of it and teaching it teaching it in the American schools, do you think that the internet itself has become a much better background to learn about evolution because of the critiques that are constantly levied against it? I think I've learned more about evolution from the online debate as opposed to learning about it in school.
Yes and no. The problem with the internet is that, well, everyone has a connection to it, and any idiot can post anything. But of course, any smart person can post anything as well. So you have to vet your experts. You have to say, well, okay, this is a person who obviously knows what he's talking about, and I can trust the information they're giving me. But in order to do that, you have to have at least a rudimentary understanding of the subject in the first place to be able to spot the bullshit when you hear it. Um, you know, if you don't have a solid background in the science to begin with, it's going to be very difficult to distinguish the science from the pseudoscience. You know what I mean?
Completely hear you on that one. And I do think you are right. You do need the proper sources in which to learn about this.
I mean, not Fred Durst would probably sound convincing to me if I had no clue about evolution whatsoever. Yeah, of course. How evolution is not a science. Oh, okay. You know, you have to have an understanding of it first to know to figure out who knows what he's talking about and who doesn't. And the problem is with the internet, everyone has a connection to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's the problem with open source, right? That's the problem with any open source.
Fair enough, but I always think that people do have a way of distinguishing the bullshit from the actual stuff. I have a friend who basically started off his YouTube career as a young Earth creationist, and
Mm-hmm.
after engaging with plenty of people on the subject, he actually did come to the notion that evolution did happen. Not only that, but he also became an atheist, which not where I would have gone, but that was a decision.
Well,
Yeah,
belief in evolution is not the same thing. Belief in evolution obviously is not the same thing as being an atheist. I mean,
oh, exactly.
yeah, I mean, I could wake up tomorrow convinced evolution is a lie. It wouldn't change my mind on the God subject. That's to me a totally separate issue.
Exactly. You can easily say I don't know, and that's a perfectly legitimate answer
Yeah.
to who made the people.
And not only that, but evolution isn't a complete response to who made the people. It's only a partial response. It takes you from early single-celled organisms to people, but that's not a complete answer for where we came from. We don't have a complete answer from where we came from. So
Exactly.
the answer is still I don't know, even if you believe in evolution. It's
Exactly.
just they're just breaking. Science just breaks off another chunk of reality and says, here, we're going to deal with this part with our theory.
I
No,
completely agree
no
with you.
scientific theory is meant to be a complete account. Sorry?
No, I completely agree with you on that one, especially the fact that you pointed out that we don't have any knowledge of abiogenesis currently.
Right. Well, I mean, they're making some headway. I think that they've elucidated some ways, some possible ways that if you break it down into steps, first you have the RNA world, and then you have this, and you have that. They've elucidated possible pathways that you can get from non-organic to organic, but no one's ever witnessed it happen. So far as I know.
Science can only be on the right track. I think there's always a progressive course, at least
Sure.
as far as I can see it.
Yeah. On the abiogenesis thing, one interesting, well, the approach I usually hear from people who think that it's impossible, just say, well, life and non-life, just one cannot come from the other. So they say they have nothing in common. So how could life possibly come from non-life? And I've always wondered, well, if that's true, is that unidirectional? I mean, can non-life come from life? Obviously, if life can't come from non-life, how could non-life come from life if they have nothing in common and one could never come from the other?
I
And
would,
then I
I would,
wonder, sorry?
I would also point out the fact that would be a fallacy of composition. I mean, technically, if you go down far enough, our atoms are non-life, but we're life. So there
Yes.
you are.
Yep. And I would also point out, if it is two-directional, then how did a living God create a universe full of non-living things?
That's completely true. This is what the problem is with some heuristics. They're just very simple and about face. Whereas if you actually sat down and thought and compiled your terms, then you realize, okay, this could be either very strong or very weak.
Hmm.
And yeah, with but with regards to the person I was bringing up in open sources, the point I was just trying to make is I think if you even have a debate online, and you
Mhm.
actually have the truth on one end and falsehood on the other, and people are actually making an open effort to learn about the other side, you're really going to know who's right in the conversation. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I think you're right. If you persist with it long enough, and your critical thinking skills are sharp, and you understand when someone is actually responding to an argument versus, changing, you can tell who's actually responding to their opponent's arguments and who's not. You can tell what constitutes a valid response or not. So yeah, I think if your critical thinking skills are sharp and you spend enough time immersed in the debate, eventually you're going to figure out who's telling the truth and who isn't. But I think most people don't have time for that.
I guess not. Too bad more people can't engage with dialogue online with strangers.
Well, see, and that's kind of what the education system is for, or should be for, to kind of do some of that legwork for you. I mean, if it's a well set up education system, it should be doing some of that legwork for you. Unfortunately, I don't know that we have such a well designed education system.
It's not bad here in Canada, although I have to say, one of the things I didn't like about my education was the fact that there were too many. That the fact is that the classes in my case I find were too overcrowded. I remember having like 30 students in my classroom, so I didn't particularly care too much for that. Plus,
Hmm.
plus there isn't always enough faculty to take care of people. So,
Hmm.
and teachers have a tough enough time as it is. I find that that was probably my only problem with the educational system, at least here in Canada. I'm not sure about the United States.
Um, we have a lot of the same problems. My mother was actually a teacher, a career teacher for 30 some odd years, so I know a little bit about that. My grandmother was also a teacher. My aunt's a teacher. My brother's a guidance counselor. So I know I've heard quite a lot about the internal shortcomings of the education system here.
Hmm.
And funny enough, I mentioned that when I practiced law, I didn't mention what I practiced. It was actually education law. But the thing is this. But the thing is this. I represented the school boards.
Ah,
So we were actually on the other side of the table from the teachers because teachers contract they have a contract, a union contract with the school board. So most of my job actually consisted of arguing with teachers why they didn't deserve that 2% increment or why they didn't deserve that promotion or that non-renewal.
I'm pretty sure you and your mother had lively conversations at the dinner table.
No, not at all. In fact, this is part of the reasons why I don't practice that law anymore.
I see. Well, you're moving. Well, okay, so you're kind of moving away from that. I couldn't imagine that bears too greatly on the conscience at times.
On the what?
On the conscious.
No, no, it doesn't.
See, guys, there is such a thing as an honest lawyer.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, most lawyers, I think, are not. I think that the stereotype is not always accurate. You know,
Hmm.
there are a lot of things you can do with a law degree other than be a litigation attorney.
Hmm.
And so I tried getting into different things like government work. I wanted to do like bill writing, for example, for the state legislature. But eventually, I got into something that would allow me to use my research skills in a way that I thought was actually making society better.
Hmm. That. Wow, that's actually very cool.
Yeah,
Well, I'm glad. Well, I'm glad you're doing what you want to do. So, and getting a great vibe out of it,
yeah,
nonetheless. Uh,
absolutely.
just to go back maybe to, I know I want to do it on the meta discussion, but you actually do have a very interesting background. Um, I actually wanted to ask who are some of your favorite YouTube atheists? Like, who are some of the guys you just like watching on the regular?
Well, they're not atheists, well, they're not all atheists, but obviously the New Covenant group I love.
Hmm.
Um, I just love the tone that they set. You know, Ozzy's good, obviously. Ozymandias. No, no more. We mentioned, I think, is one of the best, if not the best. There's another YouTuber I should mention that seems to have very few subscribers. I don't know if you've ever heard of Trenchant Atheist.
I think I've actually seen a couple of his videos on your feed. He's a younger guy, is he not? He seems very well articulated.
He's a younger guy, and he has a series on the design argument that, I mean, it's literally the best treatment I've ever seen of the design argument. I can't recommend it highly enough. I think everyone should watch it. because he has an approach to the design argument that I've just never. It's almost the same as No More's. Definitely check out his. He has a series that's provocatively titled "God is Not God: The Necessary Paradox of Theism." You really have to watch it. It's unbelievably well put together, and so much work went into it. Unfortunately, he doesn't really make too many videos anymore. I think he has, less than, I'm going to say less than 24 videos on his channel, and maybe 3 in the last year. So his work, the volume of his work is very small, but the quality is incredibly high. I think that those will be the best ones. Sorry?
I'll be sure to put a link in the description bar for you, just for any of our viewers who are interested in looking at that.
Yeah. Other than that, I mean, who else do I really like? Capricious Black Box is a nice guy. He sets I like the tone he sets. I think that the tone he sets is I mean, I don't know if he always tackles the more sophisticated arguments, but he's a great example of the kind of tone you want to set in your videos.
I've heard him tackle the moral argument. Oh, I was just going to say about Black Box. I've heard him tackle the moral argument on a couple of occasions, and it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, he's pretty good with that. And Steve Shives is obviously very entertaining.
That he is. He kind of strikes me as the everyman.
Yes, he is. And he's doing it for a living, which is amazing when you think about it. Can you imagine if you could make YouTube videos as your full-time job?
I would kill myself.
Why would you kill yourself?
No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. I should say I couldn't imagine doing such a thing because I think probably the hardest part about doing that kind of thing is dealing with the comments and the criticisms one might receive over and again, or dealing with that. Personally, I think Shives himself has a good enough following where 9 out of 10 comments are, hey Steve, bang on job. You really showed that person what for, or man, that was a brilliant video. I was so entertained by it. That kind of thing. I think he's at a point where he doesn't have to worry about it. I think for me, to me, it seems like an uphill climb that I wouldn't really want to follow in his shoes on.
You have to have thick skin, because obviously anyone can leave a comment on your video. And like we said before in the pre-show hangouts, everyone is a 500-pound gorilla behind their keyboard. And people will use a tone with you that they would never use in real life. I mean, if they had to talk to you face to face. So, yeah, you definitely need to have tough skin to do what he does.
Well, good on him. He's doing what he loves, and I will say that such a thing does sound pretty interesting when you get to that level, when you are able to make money and do what you love for a living.
Yeah.
Plus, although I have to say, another problem I would have with it is the fact that at some point you'd just have to get better equipment, and he certainly has much better equipment to deal with that, such as I think he has a green screen in the back, and he also knows how to work with the media files. And I'm pretty sure he knows how to edit his own films, which is good for him.
The films are very well. The films are incredibly well put together. But obviously, when you have all day to work on that stuff, you figure out how to do that.
I would completely agree with you. I think it just takes time, effort, and practice, and he certainly has all that under his belt. Plus, I can't believe he found an audience to listen to him go on and on about a book that takes like 6 to 10 videos. I mean, personally, I think that's good on him. He does have the patience to do that, and also good on his audience for being able to stick through the whole thing. I don't think I would have done that. I think I once tried to get through his book reading on C.S. Lewis. I should probably return to that. I haven't finished it.
Well, those book reviews are very engaging, and it's not easy to take a book like that and condense the arguments, into a half-hour video, and actually do a decent job of fairly representing them. It takes a real skill, but yeah, definitely good on him.
All right, cool. And let's see. Also, can I ask you, which are your favorite arguments to use against theists, and which ones do you consider to be the ones you shy away from or don't really particularly care for?
My favorite arguments would probably there's really not too many arguments for atheism. There's mostly just arguments showing why the theistic arguments fail. The strongest arguments for atheism would probably be arguments for the incoherency of the God concept, or logical contradictions within the God concept. I mean, those would be the types of arguments that would try to establish the impossibility of a God. And, obviously we can argue over how successful they are. Evidential arguments, the problem of evil, I don't think that there's a slam dunk logical problem of evil argument, because I think that there are logical ways, to respond to the problem of evil. Evidential arguments, though, are tougher, because evidentialist arguments say, okay, yes, it's possible that the following scenario could apply, where you have a good God, but evidentially, how plausible is this scenario? And then other arguments I think are good, are just pointing out the number of, well, this doesn't so much apply to you since you don't believe in libertarian free will, but pointing out some of the controversial philosophical positions that need to be maintained for the traditional God concept, like substance dualism, libertarian free will, creation ex nihilo, all things that any one of these are highly contentious amongst philosophers, and the notion that you need every single one of them in place in order for the traditional God concept to work, I think makes a strong evidentialist case against God, not a slam dunk case that it's impossible. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it completely does, and I think it's a lot easier to. I think it's a more apparent fact living in the Western world, because for us, evil is something that for people 2,000 years ago, it was like an everyday occurrence. I mean, that was a time where one out of three children did not live when they were given birth. That was at a time where chances are you wouldn't live past your 30s or a certain age. That it was just like an everyday occurrence. Plus, you'd see death every day. You'd actually go kill your meat. You'd raise it. You do a lot of that stuff personally. You didn't have air conditioning, and especially if you were somebody if you were a criminal, or in some sense, the government had problems with you, such as the Christians who were persecuted, or the Jews who were persecuted, or the pagans who were persecuted after we took over. If you were part of any of that group, you were going to face tremendous evil that was far greater than just the everyday stuff you deal with. Now, for us, if we were to ever see somebody live in a first century kind of a mindset or manner, we'd be like, oh, that would just be awful. But for them, it was kind of like a hedonic treadmill. It was something that you put up with every day because that's what you're used to, and that's what the environment you were in tune to. And because the church over here in the States isn't persecuted, and by persecuted I mean persecuted, not people riling against my beliefs persecuted, or not letting me take the law over for my own ends persecuted. I mean, like, Christians in the Middle East, or even atheists in the Middle East, they're also persecuted too. That kind of persecution, I would say, that if you point to that much. Now, I'd say if you actually have a church that goes through the angles and actually says, look, we've suffered through this too, it would be a lot easier to take the punch out of the evidential argument, but we clearly don't. The churches are seen as being very rich, fortuitous. They're not somebody you kind of imagine empathizing with the poor, and thus you kind of see them as not really contributing to the whole let's endure and persevere through this evil kind of argument that was very popular at the time of Irenaeus, who was like, evil is sent here for a spiritual test, that kind of thing. But because we're not enduring spiritual hardships, then that argument is moot.
No, I mean, obviously, people who live in palaces, have a different sense of hardship than the rest of us do. But yeah, that's definitely, I agree with all those points for sure.
Yeah, I do. And some of your least favorite arguments are the ones you shy away from.
My least favorite arguments for atheism,
or against theism. Maybe ones that you felt that theists kind of have a okay or decent answer to.
Let me think about this. What are some bad arguments for atheism? Well, certainly the late Christopher Hitchens, I thought, in a lot of his talks. I like Hitch, but a lot of times he didn't really respond to arguments with anything other than pointing out the evils that religion or the evils that have been motivated in the name of religion. I find that a lot of atheists go to that far too frequently. It has nothing to do. The evils that are performed, and there are atheists who do evil things. The evils that are performed in the name of religion have nothing to do with whether or not God exists. Another argument that I think is not so good is trying to explain belief in God as some sort of a pattern seeking, that our ability to, that we're pattern seeking animals, and therefore, and that's why we sense, agency in the universe. Well, that explains why it's not rational, or why your basis for believing in God might not be rational, but it doesn't mean there isn't a God. People can. Sorry?
I was just gonna chime in on that. It could have meant that God designed us with the psychology to believe in His existence.
Yeah, it could, but also the other thing is that even if you have bad reasons for believing in something, that doesn't mean it's not true. You can believe in something that's true for the wrong reasons. That would be another reason why it's not a favorite argument for me.
All right.
Oh, another one that I absolutely hate is the which god? Well, you don't believe in Thor, you don't believe in Zeus, which god? I mean, kind of stop, okay? If a person is arguing for the existence of a God, they're not arguing for the existence of the Christian God or for Yahweh. If a person puts together an argument for some kind of cosmic first cause that was a personal agent, or a teleological argument for some kind of designer, asking which God is completely irrelevant. These arguments are meant to establish a God, not a specific kind of God. And pointing out, well, you don't believe in Thor, you don't believe in Zeus. We're not talking about any of that. We're talking about arguments for some kind of personal agent that made the universe, and arguing over which religion has the right one. I'm tired of hearing the why don't you believe in Thor? Why don't you believe in Zeus? Well, we're not talking about why I don't believe in those things. We're talking about why I do believe in some kind of agent. I wish that argument would go away.
No, I completely agree with you. I also have to put up with that argument too. The best way I point out is, look, that's a question of identity. This is a question of ontology. I'm saying,
right.
Yeah, I'm saying ontologically there has to be ontologic. I'm arguing for the ontological existence of a God. I'm not arguing for an identity or what this God has, or a way to identify what this God has done in human history. I'm just saying, look, there must be an ontological entity at this point in time to explain such and such an event.
Right.
That's basically it, and that's as far as I'm going.
Right. Now, if a person wanted to point to, pagan gods like Thor and Zeus as examples of, okay, here's something we don't understand, or we didn't understand at once upon a time, and we tried to explain it by way of some kind of supernatural personal agent, and that explanation turned out to be wrong. But we know that we have a tendency to infer agency when we don't understand things, because we're agents. So it makes sense to try to explain things in terms of agency, especially when we can't explain them in any other kind of way. If you want to give that as a reason for why, if someone asks, well, why would somebody believe in it? If it's not true, you could give that as an explanation for why someone will believe in it. But it doesn't, but where, what the origin of the belief is. If someone demands an origin of religious belief, that could be one possible origin of it. But it certainly doesn't falsify the religious belief in question. It just gives an explanation for where it came from, assuming that it's, that it's not true.
No, I think you perfectly captured that. I think, if I could just be so blunt as to say good and bad arguments for theism, personally, I would advise classical metaphysical arguments just focus on the philosophical angles. This is why I kind of like the contingency argument. This is also why. Oh, I also like another argument from Desire that I'm not going to get into. But if you've read C.S. Lewis, you've probably known this argument as well.
Yeah, I've read Mere Christianity, and I also listened. I mean, I caught that part of the hangout last night. So yeah.
And but the arguments I really detest. Let's see. I actually completely agree. The teleological argument is mostly bunk. Not only in biology, but it's far too speculative to even consider in physics. Not only that, but I think it would be far too speculative to consider it in just your everyday life. I mean, you could argue for a God possibility in any which way. Even if you say, look, this has a natural explanation, you can just push God one step further back, and this is also it doesn't even lead you to God, because all you need is an architect or a demiurge. or so it could basically be a space alien for all you know.
Yeah, a designer need not be omnipotent or omniscient. In fact, one of the reasons why I love Trench and Atheist's series so much is that he makes the argument that it couldn't possibly have been omnipotent or omniscient by breaking down what design actually is and what sort of finite factors have to be in place for designs. He basically makes the argument that design is for finite creatures, never for infinite ones. Definitely check that out. I mean, I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Oh, I definitely will, and I'll definitely link it. And I'd also like to say that there is a good argument. A friend of mine who is a popular atheist podcaster, Justin Schieber of Reasonable Doubts, he's actually constructing his own argument against God from intelligent design. Basically, what he's doing is inverting the whole premise and saying, probabilistically, God would not have created a world like this. He would have more likely created a better one. Not only a better one, but he would have probably not even been constrained with fine-tuning. Who's to say he couldn't have had a world of only spiritual beings?
Right. Why can't he make beings of pure energy? Or pure spirit? Or beings of pure spirit? I mean, isn't that what some people think heaven is anyway?
Oh, yeah, I know, which it's not. People, I know. Just saying, people should actually look at the notion of the resurrection of the dead.
Check out No More's series on the assumption of design proponents, because he talks about exactly this. It's like, well, why can't God make life any way he wants? He could have made life out of tachyons floating in the void, you know? By saying that God could only make life from carbon, you're placing limits on God in terms of he's limited by materialism. He's limited by physicalism. You don't want to argue for fine. The very name fine-tuning implies limitations. When you fine-tune something, you select, from within a predetermined range that you have no control over. You find the part of that predetermined range that is suitable for your purposes. Well, if he's God, he made the range.
No, I agree with you on that one. I'd say the best response to that one, as far as I could come up with, is probably God is if someone is adamant that God would have created it like this, I could say, well, for all you know, we're living in a Berkeleyan dream world where fine-tuning is all illusion, all an illusion, or maybe come up with another metaphysical notion of occasionalism, where God has supreme sovereignty over the causes of every single atom in the universe. I don't like those metaphysical conceptions, especially occasionalism. Berkeleyan idealism seems kind of interesting to me because it's one of the ultimate unfalsifiable metaphysical hypotheses. It's almost like solipsism, but less ridiculous. At least you can disprove somebody else's solipsism. If I come to you and say, look, you're just my own hallucination, I falsified that claim. You falsified that claim because you're thinking, you have mental space.
In my own mind, I falsified that claim.
Exactly. You haven't falsified the fact that we're all just ideal beings, just with an ego that's controlling and an ego that's unrestricted. Or an ego that's restricted, that acts in a fine-tuning kind of way. So basically, that's probably the best way I could think of to come to that argument. Although I find that No More also tackles Johann Ratz, who also is a proponent of this idea. And again, check that one out because it's also pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've been watching. He has that series now that he's doing where he's defining materialism.
That should be a very interesting video series. I'm going to see it as soon as it comes out. Although
that guy is scary smart. Boy, I would hate to be in a debate with that guy.
Part of me feels like I want to do a response video to him on is your brain intelligently designed, because I think the problem with that video was the person he was addressing is kind of a moron. So I feel, hey, maybe I could address it in a better way, because the main premise is very similar to Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism.
Yeah, very similar. Very similar. I actually did a response to No More's video on that, and I pointed out that, when we talk about intelligent design, we talk about simplicity, not complexity. I mean, the goal of intelligent design is actually to come up with the simplest solution possible, not the most complex one. You don't. Subcontractors who get engineering jobs are the ones that come up with the simplest solution possible relative to what's even possible in the first place. With a God, there's always a simpler solution possible. And I pointed out that when if you believe you have a soul and a brain, if your identity, I mean, a guy like Once Forgiven, Now Free believes that the soul lives on in some kind of afterlife as some kind of immaterial thing that preserves all of your personal identity, your memories, your emotions, your cognition, everything. So it would seem that the soul alone, on Once Forgiven, Now Free's view, the soul alone suffices for memory, for cognition, for all this other stuff. Well, a soul alone is a less complex arrangement than a soul plus a brain. The brain would actually be, since we have brain areas that correspond to all these functions, the brain would actually be an unnecessarily complex addition to the design. So under the rules of intelligent design, the brain would actually be unintelligently designed because it's needlessly complex, when the soul alone, under Once Forgiven, Now Free's view, would suffice to get the job done for
And in
all the
fact,
things that make us us.
I agree. And in fact, I would act if I had a choice between. I have a particular view on the mind body. That just to put it plainly, I think that the soul is the form of the body. But putting that aside, if I was actually to choose, if that was considered untenable to me tomorrow, I would actually be a Christian materialist who act,
Mm.
and these people actually exist. One of the best proponents and professional Christian apologists for this viewpoint is uh, his his name is escaping me right now, but he has a blog called Right Reason. He basically makes an argument by scripture against the notion of substance dualism, and he says that's completely foreign to Christianity.
Mm.
It was a pagan innovation that got caught in Christianity, and if
Mm.
one looks at the scriptures, God made man out of the dust. He's making him from the ground, organic material. There is no space where it refers to man having a soul, and he says that's just a Platonic invention that got encapsulated into Christianity at one point and became
Didn't
popular
the,
again with Descartes.
correct me if I'm wrong, because you would know better than me, but didn't the early Christians actually believe in like a physical bodily resurrection, where
No,
the
yeah,
afterlife is actually your physical body has been reconstituted into another physical form? I mean, it's different. It's a perfect body in heaven, um, but that's what they believed, right?
basically. And the only problem Christian materialists have is the teleporter problem, which basically amounts to if you go through a teleporter and everything's reconstituted, is that still you? Which
Right.
is a really interesting one, and I think there are some cogent materialist answers to it.
Well, not if they physically float to heaven, right? And then they wouldn't be teleported. They would actually be physically traveling. Like it was meant to. Did they think of it as a physical place, heaven?
Yeah, basically it's just the same world with different laws. So,
Hmm.
so basic, so basically,
Ah, so it is possible for life to exist under different laws. So,
it is. Oh, completely.
so
Under that one, they would just under that one. Basically, they come up with this two-prong hypothesis where phase A is essential to phase B somehow. Um,
hmm.
with let's see, I really want to remember his name because he's actually a pretty good guy, and I've had personal interaction with him, and I can say definitely he's one of the better apologists out there. Glenn Peoples, I remember it now.
Glenn
Glenn Peoples.
Peoples. Okay,
Yep,
so a Christian materialist named Glenn Peoples.
yep. Blogs at
Hey,
right.
listen. If there can be atheist non-materialists, there can be Christian materialists.
I've actually heard a friend say he interacted with a guy from the state of Florida from not yeah from the state of Florida at the university there. Basically he was an atheist but a substance dualist at the same time. So was Karl Popper, by the way. And
Interesting.
yeah,
Well,
so substance dualism not off limits to atheists, by the way.
if you look at polls of professional philosophers and what beliefs they favor, you'll find that a larger percentage of them are atheists than are materialists, which can only mean that there are some atheists, non-materialist philosophers out there, and probably a good percentage of them from the polls I've seen.
Yeah, the hugest number for people who don't believe in material things are Platonists, mathematical
Mhm.
Platonists to be specific, which is completely different. Well, not completely, but it's very dissimilar to original Platonism that believed in a world of forms. They basically hold that numbers are just an example of immaterial objects that exist alongside the rest of the universe.
And they're just brute facts, right? They're not caused in any way.
Exactly. In fact, that's actually a very tenable position. It's not one that I accept, and it's not one I know a lot of people accept, but it's tenable, and
Mhm.
I've heard good arguments from it. One of the best
Mhm.
ones is actually from science because basically they claim, look, I think it was Hillary Putnam and W.V.O. Quine who basically came up with this notion called the indispensability argument.
Hmm.
Basically because so basically it follows that because we are committed to our best scientific hypotheses. That's the first premise. Premise two, we are committed to the ontological existence of entities that contribute to our best scientific hypotheses. Math is indispensable to scientific hypotheses, therefore, mathematical numbers and objects ontologically exist. So
Hmm.
basically, it works on that framework, and it's comparable to quarks, for example, or
Hmm.
atoms. Nobody's ever seen a quark or an atom, but we have plenty of models of physics that do incorporate these. We do have plenty of models in physics that incorporate these notions
Sure.
of quarks, and the success of those models validify their existence too. So
Right.
we can
Right. Right.
do that with mathematics.
Yeah. So you see, people can believe in things which they can't see.
Well, yeah. Although, funny enough, a lot of apologists actually use this argument for immaterial things. William Lane Craig actually pulls this out from time to time, which is funny because he's actually a mathematical anti-realist or anomalist. He
Is he
doesn't,
really?
yep, doesn't believe any of those things exist.
Yeah, he doesn't. He rejects Platonic forms. He says it's incompatible with Christian theism.
Basically, that's basically his viewpoint on the matter. Uh, my viewpoint is that my viewpoint is basically that they exist inside the material world in substances, but they're not like somewhere out there platonic entities. I take kind of a middle ground viewpoint. I think that numbers are just symbolic systems that represent actual entities in the material world. So I could say 1, 2, 3 because there's 1, 2, 3 apples.
Hmm.
Basically, systems exist because they correspond to actual entities. So basically,
Yeah, that would probably be the theory that I would be closest aligned with, and that makes the most sense to me.
mm, yeah, exactly. I think that's the better one to go with. Anti-realists just say they're all helpful fictions or instruments, and they don't exist in any way.
Hmm.
So there's no corollary in the actual world for 2 + 2 = 4. There's no truth bearer. I would actually say that the objects are the truth bearer. Although that leaves me at an odd end, and I haven't figured this one out for the life of me, for imaginary numbers like the square root of -1.
Hmm.
The Platonists can say, oh, it exists somewhere. The instrumentalists can say, oh, that exists nowhere. It's just fictional as the rest. I'm like, oh, crap, I'm stuck in the middle here.
Well, the Platonists would say almost everything exists somewhere, right? Now,
Yeah.
Craig, when you say Craig is a mathematical anti-realist, that's not a position that he's announced in so many words, or is that a position that
Oh,
you've kind of inferred?
oh no, no. He's actually published works on this. In
Oh,
fact,
wow.
there's a book I got from my public library which is available and it was new, so I was happy, called God and Abstract Objects, and and basically Craig contributed the essay for the anti-realist position, saying that they don't
Hmm.
exist. So he was
Wow.
defending that contention with 5 other philosophers, 3 of them Christian, 2 of them atheists.
Hmm.
And so basically they just gave a back and forth. And he's also given lectures on disputing claims for mathematical Platonism.
Hmm.
So he
Wow.
is probably open to it. But
Wow.
I'm charitable to how he says it. I basically think, oh, he's basically saying that immaterial things are logically possible, but doesn't necessarily mean that they exist. So mathematical Platonism is tenable. It's just not a position I take. I think that's basically what he's trying to illustrate with the description. Not necessarily that he himself believes it.
Okay. Fair enough. Cool.
I
Anything else you wanted to talk about? I mean, I think are we running out of time or?
Yeah, I could go on for a bit more. I don't mind. Uh, 13, I was scheduling this for an hour and a half, but this seems pretty okay on my end too. So I pretty much have no problems or qualms with it going on a bit longer.
Cool.
Um, let's see. So you said your family was mostly composed of theists. Is it
Yeah.
like a very strong connection, or is it like an everyday I acknowledge God exists and that's the end of it kind of thing?
Yeah, it's kind of the latter. I mean, my family is, I guess you'd say, Reform Jewish, you know, kind of Jewish in a very warm and fuzzy way. Um, it's kind of like I was raised. I was told that there's a God. As I was raised, I was told that there's a God. That I'm a Jew because my mother's a Jew, and that's how the law works. And then I was sent to Hebrew school so I could have a bar mitzvah, and that was pretty much the end of it. There really wasn't a much more involved religious upbringing than that. I'm not. My parents have never even read the Bible. They adhere to the customs and the traditions that they like, and they ignore the rest, which I'm fine with because I like Passover and I like going to Passover dinner. When I told them I was an atheist when I was a teenager, I got some pushback, but they're cool with it. They're not, oh, my son is going to hell. Like, no, there's none of that in my family. They're cool with it, and yeah, that's basically it. We don't. My brother, I think, identifies as an agnostic. He married a Protestant who's also an agnostic. And I think the fact that he married a Protestant upset my mother more than the fact that they're both agnostics. Because my family is a little old school like that. It's like if you're Jewish, you have to marry a Jewish person and all that. But no, they're my sister-in-law Laura. They're cool with her now. So yeah, it's a very liberal Jewish family, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Wow, wow, cool. Thanks for all that. I actually had no idea you had a Jewish background.
No, yeah. Yeah, three-quarters Jewish, three-quarters. My father's mother actually was a Protestant who converted to Catholicism later in life, but she married a Jewish man. And actually, this is kind of sad. Her family actually disowned her for marrying a Jew. And she actually didn't have any contact with. After she married my grandfather, she actually had only had contact with one other family member, because we're going back now to like the 1930s and some very old school attitudes, for people where it's like, well, the Jews, you can't marry one of them,
Christ killers and all.
Was that?
Christ killers and all.
Right.
Sorry to bring. Sorry if that was a little off color.
No, I don't. We also use the blood of Christian babies in our rituals. Probably you forgot to mention that.
Yes. And if anyone doubts this, please look up Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now,
yes.
Live on Amazon.
It's unfortunate that document was released to the general public. We would have preferred if it had stayed secret amongst ourselves.
I like how you could laugh about that. But
yeah, I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up in New York, and then I moved to New Jersey, and now I'm back in New York again. But people, I never suffered from the slightest anti-Semitism, which is why I can joke about it. I know it's out there. I know that in some parts of the world I would be, a horrible victim. But I can kind of. For me, it's baffling how anyone could believe such things in the 21st century, but it happens.
I would completely agree with you on that account. I actually do have an Arabic background myself, so I've also been accustomed to anti-Semitism, although not on the receiving side. Also not on the giving side. Not on the giving side. Just saying.
Right.
Always want to make that clear.
Right. It's interesting that I'm not more concerned with like Jewish apologetics, but that's probably because there really isn't any.
I've actually heard of people who are Jewish in background and have had Orthodox organizations contact them, reminding them that they're Jewish and reminding them to take part in the customs.
I get that.
Oh, wow.
I get that sometimes because living here in New York, we do have a very large Hasidic population. And so, there'll be times when I'll be just approached by someone who'll just walk up to me, "Excuse me, sir, are you Jewish?" And I'll just say, "No," and walk away.
Wow.
But we do get a lot. Yeah, definitely there is a push to kind of restore the Jewishness. I don't know how many Jewish people you have where you live in Canada, but most Jews in America are Jewish in the most nominal sense,
Mm.
in the sense that they think of themselves as Jewish, and that's really it. You know, I can confidently say that almost none of them have read the Bible. Almost none of them know what it says. Almost none of them follow the traditions, except for the most popular ones like Passover and Yom Kippur. I mean, the big ones. But yeah, it's a very nominal form of Judaism, and it's definitely true that some Jewish people are saying, you know, it's a pity that the Jews have survived so many things in their history, but now they're basically going extinct because of apathy.
I've actually heard from my world religions professor that some Orthodox Jews refer to the apathy of the Jews or the Reform movement within Judaism, or even the nominalization of it, as being the new Holocaust.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, well, I mean, I'm an atheist, so what am I going to say to that? I mean, fine. I mean, as long as you're not, it's the new. Obviously, allusions to the Holocaust are, you know, silly because no one's actually being killed. But yeah, it's a big thing in the Jewish. It's that's basically where the Jewish community is at now in America. Is that you have an ever dwindling percentage that actually adhere to the religion,
Hmm.
and more are becoming kind of like me.
Culturally Jewish. I've heard people describe themselves as thus.
Yeah, I would consider myself that. Sure.
Hmm. Although it's a very nice thing to have. I mean, you actually have a religious background that says, look, you don't even need to believe in the metaphysical stuff. Just come to Yom Kippur once in a while.
That's right. That's right. You know, I mentioned my cousin who's got a PhD in philosophy, and he's constantly reminding me that I don't even need to believe in God to be a Jew.
Well, does he believe in God? Or oh, he said he was agnostic about the claim, if I recall
Oh, that's
correctly.
my brother. I cannot tease an answer from my cousin about he insists that the God question isn't even whether or not God actually exists. He said is not even an important question to ask, which I find an interesting thing from a philosopher to say. But he's much more. I think he's probably a Platonist more than anything else. He has a very strong background in Greek philosophy, and I think he would best be classified as a Platonist.
Hmm.
He himself would reject that label because he hates jargon.
Oh, you mean a philosophy professor who hates jargon? No, I can't
No,
believe that. I can believe
he's
in
not.
God, but I can't believe in that.
No, no, he's got a PhD in philosophy, but he's not a philosophy professor. He's
Oh,
actually an attorney. He's actually an attorney as well, believe it or not.
oh, cool. So basically, lawyers and doctors come in your family. You are Jewish.
Basically, yeah. My mom, I said, is a teacher. My grandmother's a teacher, and my uncle's a doctor. I remember when I was in grad school and thinking about going to law school, and I talked to my uncle about it, who's a doctor, and he said, well, when I was considering graduate school, when I was an undergrad, this is back in the 70s, he was considering going to computer science because he was very good at it. Remember, this is the 70s, and he actually was an undergrad at MIT. He said, if I had stayed with computers, if I had gone into grad school in computers, I would probably own a small country by now. But but grandma said to me, look, there's really only three things. From my grandmother's perspective, there were only three things that a Jewish boy could become if he wanted to become a success. And those things were a doctor, doctor, and doctor. And if you couldn't be a doctor, then you should be a doctor. So he ended up going to law. And if you really, 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 really can't be a doctor, then you could be a lawyer or an accountant. But it's better that you had been a doctor. So he ended up going to medical school, and he's happy. He likes being a doctor. Would he have been more happy had he stayed with computers? Probably.
Oh, that's fairly interesting. Um,
Yeah.
the whole family, your whole family background and dynamic. You know, maybe you could be the first atheist anti-Jewish missionary. If they had them, of course. But, I know most of the Jewish community doesn't proselytize, and
No.
no.
How
I
could they? I mean, if you're Jewish by birth, right? I mean, if the
oh, I
whole
actually
idea.
know. Oh, I actually know a guy who is a Jewish proselytizer. He has his own channel and everything. He mostly tries to convert Christians, by the way, but I
Is that
think he
right?
he has he has made videos directed at atheists and Muslims.
Hmm.
His name is Rabbi Asher, and he is
Hmm.
a huge proponent of proselytization. Funny enough, it's because I think it's actually because maybe it's also the historical stuff, but he's also a Baptist by background too, a former Baptist minister.
A former Baptist who converted to Judaism,
Hmm.
who's now proselytizing for others to convert to Judaism.
Basically.
All right.
Yeah, now you've heard everything. It's the internet. Welcome.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
I mean, I was always told that growing up, I was always told that Jewishness was essentially a birthright, not that you're born Jewish and that's that. That's what I was always told by my parents.
Well, it's not something I could see any reason in doubting. I mean, I kind of think of it more in terms of nationality. I'm Lebanese by nationality too. It's not something I think about every day of the week, but
Hmm.
it's something that's a part of me. It's nothing I would ever deny. I'm Lebanese, and that's that brute fact about me.
Hmm. But the interesting thing about converts is that the converts are always the ones that take the religion seriously, more so than the people who are born into it.
That's true, but you could say the same thing about being an immigrant to a country that you really like. I mean, I've heard of immigrants coming to Canada and even some in the United States who are just so damn proud to have their citizenship. Um, I've had relatives who celebrate when they get their citizenship. They
Hmm.
really appreciate it. I think in
Hmm.
the United States, you have to know more about history to be an American than some Americans know about their
Yes, you
own
do.
history.
That's exactly right. Yes, most people who have earned their citizenship know much more about this country than people who were born into it. And then the same thing is true for people who've converted to Judaism. I knew a Dominican lady once who married an American Jewish man, and she was I guess she was Catholic originally, and then converted to Judaism. And man, you could not tell her that she was not a Jew. And she knew everything about the. I mean, if someone said, you're not really a Jew because you weren't born, man, that was the end of it. She knew everything about the Jewish religion.
Damn. Now that takes moxie. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think that's why it's much better to see it on a par with nationality. And I could say, was she also as proud to be an American too, or was it mostly the Jewish focus that she pertained to?
Oh, I think it was both. Definitely both.
Oh, okay, that's cool. Well, it's been an hour and a half, and I think we've covered quite a bit of topics in the Hangout thus far. So thank you so much for joining me, Ed. I'll
Well, thanks for
definitely,
having me.
yeah, I'm definitely going to advertise your channel, and hopefully everything moves forward on up from here. With
Cool.
that ends the podcast. And if you like, you could end it off with some words of wisdom or just your general feel for this.
Well, this was my first podcast, so thanks for being gentle with me since it was my first time. And yeah, we should do this more. I mean, this is important. I mean, when you put a face to a name, and like I said, it's really easy to get carried away when the person is another person on the other side of a computer. It's very easy, when crafting a response to a video, to get overly aggressive, and just knowing that this other person is actually a human being who you can talk to, I think, is just so important. So, these hangouts are essential in this dialogue. So that's it.
Cool. Thanks for joining in, everybody.